just so all of you can pay attention to these specific points, we would like you to think about reframing perceptions. And when managed well, cattle can be seen as a solution rather than a problem, as mentioned before. Describe the plant grazing principles in a nutshell, mimicking natural herbivore movements to restore degraded landscapes, recognizing the benefits to biodiversity conservation, climate resilience, and sustainable livelihoods. Create win-win linkages between conservation and agriculture. So those are the key points for you to watch out while the lecture is on. And with that, over to Tabang.
Thanks. So good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for participating in that little Menti exercise. I think it was just, so there's basically no grading or anything, and if you got all the answers or most of the answers wrong or correct, we're just happy that you participated and you sort of could gauge where is your understanding of what we are talking about. And I mean, if you don't have full understanding, this is the right place to be, because that's where we are together going to learn about a few things. So as Johan has already introduced me, my name is Tabang and I work for the Southern African Wildlife College. And at the Wildlife College, I actually look after the nature-based economy and community-led conservation practices department. So today we're just going to talk about, it's not the cow, it's the how. And I think we'll find out as we go in the presentation, what does this really mean? And I'll keep on reiterating on this. So for the longest time, as I think we have seen this also in the quiz, that cattle or livestock has been seen as an issue, as a problem, especially to conservation, and more especially to areas or communities living in the boundaries of protected areas, wherein there is no linkage between cattle and wildlife. And I'm just giving you a scenario that imagine you have a community around a protected area wherein you have communities or households owning livestock. Where I come from, probably each and every other house in my village has livestock. And each and every other house in my village has a herder whom the farmer or the household has employed to look after the cattle. And there's no way in shape or form that cattle can just be left roaming like that. But the reality of the matter, especially in the African context in the rangelands, that there's no herding at all. You have herders and they just take the cattle and leave them in the bush. And that's why you end up having things like your collisions on the roads with the cars and the cattle in many rural areas. But what we are trying to do is that we're trying to bring in the concept of herding, and herding as a management tool to try to improve rangelands and also to improve the management of rangelands and also the health of the cattle to ensure better outcomes and profits. That's someone mentioned in the Mentimeter profit, because that's what the farmer wants. You have cattle because cattle is your own resource, because you don't own most of the people don't own protected areas and they don't own wildlife, but they have cattle that they depend mostly on it financially, and they have to take care of that. And for us to be able to take care of that, we need to sort of now changing our ways of thinking about around cattle and how we manage them and how we actually grow our local economies and improve our livelihoods through rangelands. And conservation in that process then becomes an unintended positive consequence. I can tell you now a few things: that if kettles are not headed, they are more likely to be depredated by livestock, by wildlife, by predators. They are more likely to catch diseases, but most importantly, which the concept that we are talking about today addresses, is that when cattle are not headed properly or managed properly, we continue doing what we call continued selective grazing. So continued selective grazing is like this. So you live in a community and resources such as grass is not an and infinite resources. It means it is limited. And imagine all those households that actually have cattle. Then when the herder wakes up and take out the cattle in the bush, they will take them to an area where they know there is a palatable, suitable, good grass. And that it is an exact practice called selective continuous grazing, because you only graze good grass, you only graze in good areas, and the ultimate consequence of that is deserts. So we slowly forming deserts by the practices that we employ when we try to actually improve our cattle health and livelihoods and all that. And I just want to move, yes. So what happens is that this uncontrolled animal movements is one of the biggest challenges in the communal rangelands. And the reasons is because of lack of skills. And then I just put it, just think about it in the back of your mind. If you have cattle at your household, and think about the person who's looking after your cattle. Is this person has certain skills of heading, or is just someone who sort of, they haven't gone too far in their education and they decided, you know what, this will be now how I make a living, and I can look after cattle. But there is no skill behind that. There is no responsibility behind that, and there is no support systems that are given to the header to actually understand things like to see, oh, the cattle today has this kind of mucus on the nose. This is what it means, and I'm not throwing a huge blanket at everything, but there are some that know the issues, but there are most of us or most of the headers do not know the issues. So if cattle is not kralled and headed properly, and it results in uncontrolled animal behavior, and which causes increases in rangeland degradation. That's what I've mentioned, actually causing deserts, and predation becomes much higher and higher, disease transmissions, poor head health, the meat trade barriers. Now, if your cattle has a poor health and it does not eat good grass and has diseases, you are not able to trade the meat at a very high standard rate because your meat is actually degraded. You can see in the shops where they would tell you, yeah, this is grade A meat, this is grade B meat. So that's how the standard of the meats then becomes sort of deteriorating in the process because of the situation of the health of the animals. Then you have poor production, then you have high stock theft, road accidents, and tourism conflicts. So all of this then now contribute to a loss to the farmer or that household that owns cattle. Um, so the challenge in communal farming systems is basically it is very complex. And what we're trying to do from a conservation point of view is actually ensuring that there's always grass for cattle to feed. But what are the interests of the farmer of the house or the household that owns cattle? Is that their livelihood needs to improve, their cattle needs to be fed, they need to be able to sell their cattle at a much higher rate because the cattle is healthy. But if all this is not uh, done, then it becomes an issue. So one of the models that we actually follow to try make sure that we always have grass is what we call combined grazing with communities. So think about all the cattle in your community being together and sleeping together in one crowd, and being headed in phases, and this is not rotational grazing, and I think later on we will go deep dive into what this means. So it is not a rotational grazing process, but is actually planned, strategic, and adaptive grazing in such a way that if we understand that this month we need to move all the cattle of the community in this block of the rangeland, and it happens that maybe in the past 2 months there was no rain, but then it means the grass on the other side is not enough for all the stock to be able to feed. Then we become very adaptive in what we do and actually think what is it that we need to do. So it is a very complex and dynamic and multi-dimensional situation, but yet the solution must be simple. for a typical farmer to understand. The solution needs to be simple, it has to be practical, it has to be traditionally acceptable. So, for example, asking a community to do a combined heading. So it means that the positives behind that is that we are going to achieve what we want to achieve in terms of controlling where the cattle move, controlling the diseases of the cattle, actually bringing the human resource capacity of the herders together under one roof to actually look after cattle as a group of people taking different responsibilities in that process. And what happens is that during the night the cattle are in the kraals. During the day, the cattle are looked after by herders. So the issues of livestock depredation is no longer there. The issues of theft are no longer there. So many things get to be toned down, or many challenges get to be addressed through this. And I'm going to tell you just a quick story that, for example, in other parks, for example, in the Kruger National Park, in the north of Kruger National Park, there hasn't been lions for the longest time. And one of the main reasons is because of the snaring that's going down in those areas because of the communities living around the park. They put the snares up for two reasons that I know of. One, actually because some much is just a illegal act of trying to get the animals. Another one is because people are angry, communities are angry because predators predate on their cattle. Simply because what? There's no heading, there's no strategic crawling, and there is no combined grazing initiatives. Cattle just go roaming around and then they get attacked by predators. As a result, they put snares, and when the snares are there, they wipe out all the animals in that area. And then what the consequences of that is actually the tourism becomes affected, because there's no tourist who wants to pay a lot of money to go to not see a lion or to not see those apex predators that you can find. So this could be, when we come to the farm, to the agriculture and conservation interface, this could be a good model that people can implement to work together with communities and protected areas. And then you see the land as at a landscape level instead of having a protected area and rangelands. In some countries, for example, in Mozambique, you have people still living within the protected areas, living with their cattle in there, and they've got this nice plan. They've employed this model to actually come up with the grazing plans and all those kind of things. And those grazing plans institute, they take into consideration where the water resources, the water points are, how often do we graze, which areas do we graze, you know, where do cattle move as opposed to wild animals, and with continuous heading and strategic kralling put in place. So the issue with modern day conservation is that we have now actually what I'm trying to say is that we've moved to a more fortress conservation in the past, of actually saying that we are protecting the animal species, we don't care, we're protecting the wild animals, we don't care about the people, we don't care about people living around the communities around us, but we just want to protect and save the rhino. For example, the rhino becomes the most special, iconic species that everyone rallies behind, but there is a very soft a sport that can be identified to form relationships between protected area management and communities, and that is actually inclusive conservation practices. So inclusive conservation practices, we're talking about which, in whatever aspects of decision making that you do, especially as a protected area or as a farmer or as a community person living in the communities around protected areas, or even if not in protected areas, but you need to be responsible in your actions. And being responsible in the language of conservation, it means taking into consideration the three spheres of of conservation, which is the social aspect of it, for the park to understand. If I practice fortress conservation, if I now, what I do in my practice see people who need to benefit, who need to collect firewood from the protected area, people who need to graze cattle in the protected area, and see that as a problem, then the more likely that your conservation model will succeed are very less. So you need to take into consideration the social aspect of things, that people need to benefit from conservation. You need to follow the aspects of people-centered conservation. That's where you will understand that, okay, I own a rhino, but someone on the other side of the fence owns a cattle. How can we work together to try to improve livelihoods of the people living in the communities, and also maximize profit through what we do in terms of conservation? So it's very important for us and the conservation practitioners, the farmers, and everyone living on this earth to be responsible in making decisions. And being responsible, it means that before each and every decision that you make, you consider the social aspect of it, the environmental impact of that, and the economic aspect of that. So quite a lot of time in the for-trade conservation space, it is only the environment that is taken care of and that is considered. But these days we want to say, oh, there's people living outside of the park who have cattle. Why are we burning the grass instead of bringing in the cattle to come and graze this grass? Then you form those social relations and social dimensions with the communities to understand, oh, we are actually benefiting from the grass that the park has instead of burning it. But at the end of the day, the cattle of the farmer becomes fed. The protected area is happy because there is no felt fires because of high grass and the fire breaks and all those kind of things. So we need to be responsible in what we do. Um, Going on to the next slide, I just wanted us to just now talk about regeneration. What does it really mean? So for a longest time that we have mentioned that cattle have actually been seen as a threat to biodiversity, because it is believed that cattle harbor diseases that they spill over between from cattle to wildlife. But actually, some studies actually found that cattle does not transmit most of the diseases than a buffalo. So it is always like that. So we need to sort of find a common ground between conservation and agriculture to say, how can we work together to form these integrated systems to try work together and be regenerative in our practice. So there was a question that we are saying that the life in the regenerative grazing practices is actually mimicking the wild the wild herbivore in a protected area. So if you can see, when we talk about regeneration, we're saying that we don't want to use chemicals to grow our grass. We don't want to spray things to try to remove pesticides, but we want to use this cattle as a tool, because you don't need to have a mowing machine. The cattle are there to graze the grass and make it flat. And when the grass is finished, they move on to the next paddock to graze. And when they move around, they defecate on the ground, they stumble the ground, and they decompose and sort of massage and make the soil much more ready and prepared for grass to grow when the rains come. So imagine you have a lot of you have a community area that is actually bare ground, and for the next 3 weeks you head the cattle and you corral them onto that bare ground, that they defecate, they stumble on the ground and make the soil much more ready for germination of the grass, and and that is the process of what we're trying to employ here. And when the rains come at that area, then the grass will grow. And the time when that grass grows, the cattle now are on the other side of the rangeland, and they are waiting to come in this side probably after 6 months or 10 months or something like that, when the grass is there. So basically, you will always have grass. So hence the whole regeneration concept. You will always have grass on the soil. And what does that mean? That actually mitigates against climate change, because when you always have grass on the ground, the carbon that's supposed to go onto the sky, it gets trapped into the grass, and then we come to mitigate climate change like that. And then there is also opportunities for the economies to thrive in the process, because now you can go into the space of, biodiversity credit, carbon credits, and all those kind of credits that you can claim, as imagine as a community and farmers working together and achieving those kind of goals. So the whole program sort of carries a mandate of a proper ecosystem restoration process that actually improves people's livelihoods, and conservation or ecosystem restoration becomes an unintended positive consequence in the process, because a farmer has got nothing to do with conservation, but as a citizen they are obliged to ensure that they are responsible in what they do. So that's what I was talking about. So basically, it's not the cow, it's the how. Is the cow is not the problem, is how you use it, is how you manage the cow. So if you see on the left-hand side of this diagram, you can see that the cattle are just left all over to go and graze. But that's what we call continuous selective grazing, and it's a problem. It's a huge problem because there's loss of wildlife in the process, because there's no grass for animals to coexist. There's runoffs, there's deserts that have been formed. But when you look on the other side, we're talking about now managed grazing. And managed can be a form of planned grazing, can be an adaptive grazing method that you're talking about, where actually you now graze your rangeland as paddocks. So there's no select. If the cattle are in this area, in this block, they are obligated to feed in that block until they consume the grass to a point where you are happy to say, let them move forward. And as they move forward, the grass at the back start to grow from there. So you always have grass uh, in your rangeland. So for us to actually try and understand this concept, so we remember when we talk about that, so the use of domesticated hard-hoofed animals in the way that wild herds would have fulfilled the ecological roles in the past. So what the wildebeest is doing is what the cattle is doing. And think about it, and think about how the habitat of a cattle looks like, and how the habitat of a wildebeest, or of the wild of protected areas look like. Because in this protected area, what is actually essentially practiced, or in the game reserves, it is continuous selective grazing. And a conservationist will come and tell you that I'm doing conservation, I'm growing, and I'm growing populations, but the habitat, it is not controlled by you. And anything can go south anytime. But when it comes to cattle, we have the power to be able to grow grass however we want, to make our cattle fat, and sell our cattle at a higher and good rate to the market. So what you see on the right is actually what this is a typical, this you'll find this in a nature reserve, or even in a rangeland, if the management principles are not good. So those are the outcomes of selective continuous grazing. But when you talk about planned grazing, there's always going to be grass. There's no way that someone would be saying it's dry season, and even if there is dry season, but at minimum, there will be food for cattle to feed. And basically, this is not what we want. Hence, we want to employ the method of planned regenerative grazing. But we cannot employ the method of planned regenerative grazing with wildebeest and buffaloes in the park. So what we can do is to work with farmers who are nearby, who are living in nearby communities, to say, how can we close these deserts that are found in protected areas? And it's simply by bringing in cattle and grazing in there and doing strategic herding. So what is important is that herds in modern times are vastly reduced and absent from rangeland, and they are unable to migrate, so they are mostly dysfunctional. So obviously, with some few exceptions in some of the East African countries like your Kenya, but so where you have huge, the great wildebeest migration, where you have huge herds of, that's where you would see the impact of the whole process in a protected area. But if you don't have large herds, that process is not there. So the alternative now is to work with the regenerative practices through plant grazing, and working together with communities to ensure that cattle are headed and there's a strategic plan towards that. And that builds and improves the relationship between communities and protected areas. So for the first time in conservation areas actually use the problem, what they've seen previously as a problem, as a tool to improve wildlife habitats and improve the socio-economic issues with communities by actually allowing access under an agreed grazing plan. So the community now has an extended land that they do not depend only on their rangeland, but also they can use some parts of the protected area as land for them to graze the cattle. So this then shows that we are working towards a really people positive conservation practices. Conservation that considers the needs of the people and the needs of nature as well, and the needs of the economy. So you can see now the difference. So there is normal grazing, which is continuous selective grazing, and then there's actually rotational grazing, which is less obvious environmental degradation, but uses the tool of rest. So most of the time you're just resting, but when it comes to planned grazing, you know what is the stock, how much grass do I have, how many cattle do I have to put there. Imagine now you're doing a rotational grazing, but the cattle are in this first paddock, but the water is probably 20 or 5 kilometers away from the cattle. So it requires energy that those cattle have eaten the grass, which they have little energy, but they'll still have to use that energy to actually walk long distances to get water resources. That's just an example. So when it comes to planning, we will understand, okay, we need to have a borehole here, have a borehole there, have another borehole there, so that our cattle now do not have to move long distances to search for water. So normal grazing is totally unacceptable. Rotational grazing is to a less extent a bit causes less environmental degradation, but still not the best method. But planned grazing is actually the best tool to implement in trying to achieve the goals that we want to achieve. So thank you very much, and I hope that you have learned something, and I've also learned a lot from you guys answering the Mentimeter, and now I'm just looking forward to answering some of the questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Tabang, and also huge thank you for squeezing all of this information into a very short period of time, because it is literally 3 minutes before the students have to leave class. So really appreciate that you did that, and that you also managed to make the link between conservation and farming quite clear. It was interesting to me how you managed to think about incorporating farmers into game reserves, and in a way that also opens up more space for farming. But then I guess the opposite could also be true. Could farming then open up more space for biodiversity conservation?
100%, Johan, and I think the good example is actually looking at the model that the people in Botswana are following. You have in Botswana how the situation is. You don't have your typical fences and that actually show a demarcation of a protected area. So you have this coexistence and integration between people and wildlife and livestock, and it's a best actually concept to practice what we are talking about now, to say how do you then work out the interests are different, but how do you work this whole coexistence model. And the another concept is the issue of OECMs, because OECMs is other effective conservation management areas that can be. It's not always a typical, sorry, I just need to charge my computer. But it is not a typical conservation protected area like your Kruger National, but it's for example, a biosphere reserve where you have people living together with nature and coexisting. So those areas then have wildlife and then they have livestock. And the most important thing is for us to be able to manage our practices in terms of what we do.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, and actually employ enabling policies that allow that to thrive.
So Tabang, I'm curious, is there uptake among community areas where communities are owning land and where there are multiple cattle owners with small herds? Are they starting to adopt this and combine them?
Yeah, sure, 100%. I think the college actually, together with the other organizations like your Peace Parks Foundation and CI, implement this model in various countries, actually in the SADC region. And I'm just going to give an example now with the context of South Africa. We have your community property associations that are actually in co-management agreement with your government organizations like your LIDET. LIDET has various community property associations, and in those, the main mandate of the community property association, this is the land that is probably claimed by the communities and they own the land. And what they do is that most of them actually adopt and agree to actually implement these models. But most of them do not, because that's how the complexity comes in to say the traditions and the cultural norms do not maybe always allow that, because someone will say, I don't want to combine my kettles with that other household's kettles because people do things to their kettles, in terms of the beliefs and the norms and the customs. So there's always that resilience. But when shown what are the positive outcomes of that, they sort of take that on. But the good thing is that this is a community-led model. It is not something that the Wildlife College can come and say, I want to do this. It's actually enabling
Mhm.
communities and saying to them that this is the model, this is the outcomes. If you do it correct, this is what you can get out of it. And they sort of then now decide to say they jump in. So there's a lot of stakeholder engagement and community engagement and ensuring that people understand the whole governance of how this is going to work, and the leadership structures needs to be in place as well. So yeah, so people do take it up, but others need some good convincing to be able to take it up.
Yeah. I mean, land, unfortunately, in many African countries are very fragmented, so it's challenging to implement that. A
Yeah.
question that I have, what is the smallest piece of land that you've seen this work on?
And I think that actually the small piece of land that I've seen this working on is actually in one of the CPAs in Limpopo that is actually under LIDET. But the issue now in terms of plant grazing is also understanding the stock and the amount
Mm-hmm.
of grass you have. So you
Mm-hmm.
wouldn't be able to successfully do this if you have lots of cattle but less grass available or less capacity carrying capacity available in those particular areas. So it always has to be in relation to how much cattle you got.
Mm. Yeah, there's so much variation. I cannot
Yeah.
ask you the question, what is the smallest piece of land that this can work on? Because there are
Yeah.
just too many factors to consider. So,
Yeah.
Tabang, I think I'm going to end the class here. The two of you, Ernest and yourself, have been with us for 2 hours now. So really a huge thank you for your time. We really appreciate it. We've learned a lot from you today, and we will certainly take up this topic again in the future. Thank you so much for
Awesome.
your time, and thank you to the
Thanks.
students who learned with us.